Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Hey 105. We are at the bottom of 104b, and we are at the Mishnah. We are continuing our discussion of sale transactions. What happens if you sell something and you don't necessarily specify what's included? So, we've talked about boats and variety of different items. Now we're going to talk about, again, another sale transaction. But what happens if you said two things that were inconsistent? First, I tell you that I'm going to sell you, let's say, 3, and then I say I'm going to sell you 4. So which is it? Do I follow the first thing I said or the second thing I said? How do we handle it? So we're going to have an example of this right now with the beginning of the Mishnah. Now, we said, just as a reminder, we said that there are 2 different languages that you can use when you sell a piece of property. You can say, I'm going to sell you this property measured by a rope. And if you say that, it means that you mean that it's exactly the amount of size that you're saying. So if you say that you're selling an acre measured by a rope, it's got to be an acre. If you sell extra, then the person's going to have to pay for that. And if you sell too little, you're going to have to reduce the price associated with it. So that's point 1. But you could also say, I'm going to sell you an acre, more or less, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, right? So, and if you do that, well, then, as long as it's approximately okay, and we said that basically the difference is about a little over 4%. If it's about 4% off, you're all right. But more than 4%, what?
Margin of error.
Margin of error, exactly. More than 4% off, you're going to have a problem. Now, what happens if you say both?
A third position, we had Mocher Stam.
Yes, we had Mocher Stam also. So, yes, and we ended up saying that Mocher Stam is just like saying more or less. That's how we concluded yesterday. So now what happens if you say I'm selling you measured and I'm selling you more or less? So let's take a look. That's what the Mishnah is going to begin with. Mida b'chevel ani mocher lach, hein chaser, hein yaser. I'm going to sell you measured land, but it could be less, it could be more. So what does that mean? So bitel hein chaser hein yaser mida b'chavel. So according to the opinion in this Mishnah, the language that you said second of less or more, then nullifies the language of measured by a rope. And what happens if you do the opposite? Hein chaser hein yaser mida b'chavel. If you reversed it and you first said less or more, and then you said measured by a rope, so then, as we turn to Kuf Hey Amud Aleph, Batal Mida B'Chevel Hein Chaser Hein Yeser, that the language of measured by a rope nullifies the previous language of less or more, meaning that whatever we do, we follow the second viewpoint. So, Divrei Ben Nanas. That is what Ben Nanas says. Now, we don't have any alternative opinion to Ben Nanas, but we begin right away in the Gemara with understanding that there's a different opinion. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel Amar Rav. So Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel says in the name of Rav, Cholken alav chaveirov al Ben Nanas. Ben Nanas' friends disagreed with him. Okay, so what did they say? Let's take a look at Rashbam, who's going to forecast for us what they said. Dilidid who? Because according to them, according to these friends of Ben Nanas, Havi Maman Hamuta Basafek V'Cholkin. There's an uncertainty associated with having said 2 things because we don't know which of them the person intended. Demisafkalahu, because it's unclear. I Amrin Tafas Lashon Rishon, O Lashon Achron. Do we say that the first language is what matters or the last one? Kedemafarish lekamei, as we will highlight mimasnisin demerchatz. We're going to talk about a bathhouse where you rent the bathhouse, and I say that I'm going to charge you 12 $1,000 for a year, $1,000 a month. But there's a problem. The problem is that the year
Leap year.
ended up being a leap year.
Leap
Now,
year.
in the American calendar, a leap year doesn't really matter because it's really just one day.
Yeah, right.
But in the Jewish calendar, it matters a lot when I say $1,000 a month, because in the Jewish calendar, there's a whole month that gets added to the year.
Yeah.
So the question is do you have to pay $1,000 for that month or not? That's the question that we're going to say. And that's what we're going to see. We're going to quote this Mishnah in just a moment. And again, this Mishnah is in Bava Metzia. We saw it the last Masechet. And so Umihu, but nonetheless,
They added the holidays, right?
yeah, the month that they add doesn't have any holidays. It's only the second other that has the holiday of Purim. But in any event, Umihu Rav Svirule Keben Nanas. Although this statement of Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel is being said in the name of Rav, that there are those who disagree with Ben Nanas, Rav himself agreed with Ben Nanas, as we will establish by the end of today. Come on, as we were going to explain Bishmaisen in the teachings. Amri Bey Rav, that when it came to the yeshiva of Rav, Istara Meya Moi, so that when somebody says an Istara, which is 96 prutot, or and then somebody changes his language to Meya Moi, that 100 coins, which is 100 prutot. So which one determines? 100 coins is what determines. So if you say two net numbers, we're going to say that it means the second of the two numbers. So my Kamashmalan. So 1 second. How can you tell me, Rav, why is this some big chiddush of yours that you're telling me that there are people who disagree with Ben Nanas? Of course there are people who disagree with Ben Nanas, because we have the following Mishnah. Tanina, we have this Mishnah again in Bava Metzia. Masa b'tzipori, that it happened once in Sipora, that somebody rented a bathhouse from his friend, he rented it for 12 gold dinars for a whole year, 1 gold dinar for every month. And then, of course, what ended up happening, but it ended up being a leap year. So do we say that it was 12 gold dinars for the entire year, even including the leap month? Or do we say, no, it's 1 gold dinar per month. And so as a result, it's got to be an extra dinar that he's going to have to pay. Uva Maise Lifnei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and the story came to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, V'lifnei Rabbi Yossi, and in front of Rabbi Yossi, V'amru, and they said, Yachlochu es chodesh ha'ibur, we're going to divide the month, meaning that instead of paying a full gold dinar for the month, you're going to pay half a gold dinar for that month. And that way, nobody, everybody ends up even. Now, we are going to qualify the situation where the person ends up paying half the gold piece.
You could have a situation where a person, for instance,
they can use your help, Mark.
We could say that you're offering a deal. So in an event, for instance, if you buy up front let's say a table, they can offer you, if you pay now, you pay $100. You're going to pay by installments, you pay more. So the person could say, listen, I'm going to pay the whole fee right now. And there's an advantage to the buyer. I'll pay a whole year. You pay insurance for the whole year instead of buying every 6 months or whatever it may be.
Uh-huh. And I'm sorry, but I don't understand the question.
Well, I mean, you offer a deal to the buyer. For instance, you buy car insurance, let's say. You can pay for the whole year in advance, or you pay by monthly, so in installments. So therefore, it's an advantage to the maybe it's an advantage to the person to pay in full in advance. But if he can't afford it, he has to pay a little bit more because he's paying by installments.
Okay, so a couple of things on that. So the first is that paying more through installments is a form of charging interest. and that's going to generally be prohibited. So that second, it's important to know that the concept of that a renter, according to the Torah, is only obligated to pay at the end of the period. And so that's another important element to understand, is that they're only obligated to pay at the end of each period. Now,
you're right. He may be only obligated, but he could say, "I'm going to pay for the whole year in advance." Why not?
Yes, yeah, he can, but I'm not sure what the point is that, of course, if a buyer ever wants to give money early to the seller, that's not a problem. The issue is the seller is not allowed to charge interest, not allowed to charge any money for the privilege of waiting. And so that's one. And so I again, you can understand. I guess what you're saying is, let's understand this to be saying you can either pay all 12 at the end, or you could pay one each month. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, there are other options. Yeah, he could pay all at the end, or he could pay all in the beginning. And
yeah,
if it happens to be an extra month, well, so yeah, I'm not sure that's really interest. You're saying he's paying more. I don't know. Maybe it's not interest. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
If the total sum's the same, then it's not interest. If the total sums to different numbers, then it is interest. But the bottom line is what you're highlighting is maybe there's another way that we can interpret the person's statement. But it seems clear that that there's a question about whether or not what the story is. So, but all right. So now the question is let's go back up. And why did we quote this Mishnah, the Mishnah from Bava Metzia? We quoted this Mishnah from Bava Metzia because it seems clear in that Mishnah that Ben Nanis's opinion is being ignored, because rather than saying you follow just the last statement, right? Ben Nanis says you follow just the last statement, that you pay one gold dinar per month. Well, if you were to pay one gold dinar per month, well, then definitively you would definitely have to pay for the leap month, right? And we would not be splitting it. So that's the question that the Gemara is asking. So the Gemara answers, Imi hasam haba amina hasam hu. So I might have thought that only in that situation would there be a disagreement with Ben Nanis, because the ikal memar mahadar kohadar be, because there are two ways that you can read this statement. You could say that he was retracting, meaning that you could say that he meant, I don't mean 12 for the entire year, I really mean one each month, and if there's a leap month, I get 13. And there are others who say that you were just trying to explain. And the Rashbam says, Ima hasam hava amina, right? So de'ein cholken alav chaverav al Ben Nanis. You might have thought that actually the friends of Ben Nanis would not disagree with him. That when they disagreed with him, or when you might have thought that they disagreed with him over there in Bava Metzia, where in the Rashbam that is 4 lines up from the end of the narrow lines on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph, Dahasam Nami Modi Ben Nanis, Yachloku, that actually Ben Nanis would agree in the case of Bava Metzia that we split it. Because it could be that he retracted Milashon Rishon, B'tafas Lashon Achron. He abandoned the first language and focused on the second. V'nis Abra L'maskir. And now when we add an additional month, so then the landlord gets paid for the extra month. Or you could say that he did not retract anything. And the renter gets to keep the extra month. And why did he change his language? Ela parushe kamefarish. He was just trying to clarify something. De'enu maskir lo l'shana shalema. That his intention was not, in fact, to rent for the entire year, but rather vayikabel schiraso b'sof hashana, and then to accept the payment at the end of the year, kedin schirut, as in the rule of renters, she'ein mishtalemes el libesot, because you only have to pay at the very end of whatever period that you're renting, according to the strict halacha. Ela mediner zahav l'chodesh hu maskira, but rather he's clarifying that although he's renting for a whole year for 12 gold dinarim, he's really renting each month individually, because he wants to get paid with a gold dinar every month. V'gam im yirtza lachzor bo lahaskira l'sof chodesh or l'sof shnei chodeshim yuchol lahotzio mibeito. And so as a result, if he wanted to get the guy out after a month or two, he'd be able to do it. And he wouldn't have to get him another place because he hadn't rented the place for a year. Because remember, if I rent you a place for a year and then I kick you out after 2 months, well, then you better believe that I'm going to owe you to another place. I have to find another place for you to rent. Hilka kevan deika lameimar tafos lashon achron, because maybe the end of the last language, Deshema Chazarbo, Ve'ika Lameimar Tafas Lashon Rishon, and we say that maybe the first language is what matters. The Dilma Leka Hacham Lashon Achron Klal, and we're going to ignore the language at the second language at all completely. Ela Perish Ba'alma, and it's just a clarification of the first language. Larishon Hilkach Yachloku, and so as a result, maybe in that situation, Ben Nanas would agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi and say that we split it. And so therefore, Aval Haka, but here, when it came to the measuring by a rope and measuring more or less, where in our Mishnah, we say, Ben Nanas says that if you say two things that are directly conflicting one another, where there's no way to interpret it otherwise, you follow the last language. So if I tell you that we're going to measure the land that I'm selling you is measured by a rope, so that means that I'm giving you a very precise measurement. And if I say that I'm giving it to you less or more, so then it says that I'm giving you a very imprecise amount. So whichever of those two languages I say last, that's the one that Ben Nanas says applies. There's no question when you say the second statement that you were retracting. So aim low. Maybe that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi would agree with Rabben Nanas, and there would be no machlokas at all between the three of them, among the three of them. So Kamash Malan. So that is why we end up saying that in fact Rav's statement is something worth saying. That Ben Nanas, that the colleagues of Ben Nanas do disagree with him, and that the machlokas that is implied by the Mishnah in Bava Metzia, where Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi say you split the difference between the two, that is also a machlokas here, and they would also disagree with Ben Nanas.
Well, what are they splitting?
They're splitting the last month of rent. When we made the leap year and we added a month to the calendar. So according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we're going to split the rent associated with that month. And so if you're the renter and I'm the landlord, instead of paying me 12 gold dinarim for a whole year, including the leap month, you now have to pay me 12 and a half. Now, again, we are going to qualify the situation, and it's going to make a very big difference. But that's the way the Gemara understands things at this very moment.
Now, I clarify here where the Rashbam says the Eino Maskir Lo L'Shana Shlema. If he's not renting for the whole year, and then he's month by month, then why would he be even obligated to pay for the whole year?
I don't understand it.
No, in the middle of the Rashbam, it says, yes, he didn't want to rent
I understand.
I
understand that that's what the Rashbam says. What I'm saying is that the Rashbam is saying that you are not renting, you are not guaranteed the whole year. But if you are there for a whole year, well, then the amount that you owe is only 12 gold dinarim, even including the leap month. but I don't have to let you stay for that long. Now, and so that is how you can understand what I'm saying of 12 for the year and 1 per month as being a clarification rather than conflicting. So if in fact you're there for the whole year, it will in fact be 12 for the entire year, even if there are 13 months. But I'm telling you it's 1 per month because if I want to kick you out after 3 months, 2 months, whatever, I have the right to do so. Okay, and that's what Rashbam is saying. All right, and so as a result, that interpretation does not undermine the 12 for the whole year. And so as a result, in that situation, maybe Ben Nanas might agree with them. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi might also agree in our case with Ben Nanas. And we end up saying, no, Kamash Malan, that Rav's teaching is to teach us that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi disagree with Ben Nanas in both situations, whether the statements are 100% contradictory as they are in our Mishnah, or even in a situation where one might be able to try and touch in an interpretation where the second statement is actually interpreting the first. Okay, so now Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So we had Rav's opinion above about our Mishnah, and now we get Shmuel's opinion. Zu divrei Ben Nanas. This is the opinion of Ben Nanas. Aval chachamim omrim halach achar pachos mishabil lashanos. That actually the chachamim say that you follow the lesser of the two statements. So what in the world does the lesser of the two statements mean? Well, there's an interesting machlokas between Rashbam and Rabbeinu Gershom here. So let's take a look first in the Rashbam. So the Rashbam is from the bottom of the middle wide line. So not the widest lines, but the middle wide lines. From the bottom of them, it's 11 lines up at the end of the line. Hakar achar pachos shibelashanos. Achar oto halashon. So the Rashbam says we're going to follow the language shemafchit that lessens koko shalokeach, the strength of the buyer. Because we've got an uncertainty. Itavas lashon rishon o achron. Do we follow the first one or the second? B'yad hamocher shehu muchsak bakarka, and the hand of the seller, who is the one who is holding the land at this moment, bakarka shalo, he's the one who's holding his land. Al halyona, he's got the advantage because he's got the ownership of the property. He's holding the property. Hilkach. So if you said, I'm selling it to you measured, or maybe more, maybe less, or maybe more, well then chazinan im hoser kol shehu, then we take a look. Did he add something? Because if he added even a little bit, lahachi amar mida bechevel, well then that's why he said that he's selling it to you measured. And now the buyer has to return even the little bit. On the other hand, if the seller, again, I'll be the seller and Stan will be the buyer, and now I sell it to him and I said, again, maybe I sell it to you measured with the rope or less or more, and now it turns out that it's less. Now, so again, the first point of Rashbam was if it turns out that it's more, well, then Stan's going to need to return the extra land to me, or in the case of a small amount, he's going to have to pay me for that extra land. And then if it turns out that I gave him too little, if I said lahaki amar lehein chaser hein yeser, well, that's why I also said less or more, because my point is I want the advantage on both sides. If I sold you too much, I want the money for it. If I sold you too little, I want to get away with it. So shahaya yare shemelo kan base core shalom v'higio. So I was worried that there might not be enough, and so I wanted it to be a valid transaction. So that's why I said both languages. So it's interesting, right? So effectively, Shmuel is saying that the Chachamim say that actually we're going to understand that the two opposing statements are actually statements that say, I want either of these to apply to me, whichever is best for me. So zu velo sphirale, are you saying, so now the question is, that when Rav Yehuda, instead of the name of Shmuel, that these are the words of Ben-Nanas, does that imply that he does not actually agree with Ben-Nanas? Rav Ushmuel de Amri Tarvayu, but Rav and Shmuel both say, Kor bishloshim ani mocher lach, that if I say to you, I'm selling you a whole core for 30, then I'm selling you a whole unit. And either one of us can retract if we haven't done the full transfer. If I've only poured 15 slime, I'm sorry, if I've only poured the half of the core into your containers, then I could say, you know what? I don't like to do this deal. I don't want to do this deal. And we haven't done anything. But we can undo it even with the last saw of the core. Core bishloshim saw, core bishloshim saw besela. On the other hand, if I tell you that every saw of the 30 saw in the core, I'm selling you for 1 sela, well then Rishon kana. Then everybody agrees. Both Rav and Shmuel agree that that each item is sold per when each item gets poured into your containers. So every time I pour a saw, then you get that saw. You've already bought that saw, and so as a result, there's no redoing. So isn't that an indication that we follow the last language? That what matters is core, is that saw besela is the key language, and since that came last, that's why we Rav and Shmuel both say that you get that you get whatever has been poured already. So doesn't that show that Shmuel also agrees with Ben-Nanas? Ela zu usvirale. So it must be that actually Shmuel does agree with Ben-Nanas. 1 second though, umisvirale, but there's a problem with that also, because how can you say that Shmuel agrees with Ben-Nanas? Va'amar Shmuel b'va be'emsa chodesh askinan. He's the one who clarified that when the ruling of Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who say that they were splitting it, he was saying that actually was talking about a situation where they came in the middle of the month. So now we're radically changing the interpretation of the Mishnah that we saw in Bava Metzia. We had cited it for suggesting that it was sort of like uncertain money, and therefore you split it. But now Shmuel is explaining that why is it that they say you split the 13th month and that you only have to pay half? It's because the landlord came in the middle of the month. If he would have come at the beginning of the month and effectively said, listen, you have to pay for this month or I'm kicking you out of the field, kicking you out of the rental location, kulo lamaskir. Well, then the landlord gets the entire amount. And besova chodesh, if he waits until the end of the month, well, then kulo lasocher, because the lessee, the tenant, has been there already for the entire month. So he already holds that month that has already happened. So it seems like, according to Shmuel, we don't follow Ben-Nanas because we're not following the last language, which would suggest that the tenant would have to pay the extra month no matter what, because the last language was dinar lachodesh. So he should have to pay a dinar zahav for every month, and so we don't follow that. So that shows that Shmuel doesn't agree with Ben-Nanas. So as we turn to Kuf Hey Amabed,
how do we say that? How do we say it comes in the middle of the month? Didn't we say earlier that the rent is not due until the end of the month?
It's not due until the end of the month, but I come to you in the middle of the month and tell you I expect to get paid for this month. And so as a result, even though you don't owe me the money until the end of the month, because I came to you in the middle of the month, that at halfway through the month, that's the half that you've already lived in, according to Shmuel. There's nothing I can do about it. You already effectively took ownership of it because I didn't ask you for a payment for it. But the half that you haven't yet lived in, you owe me for that half. That is what how Shmuel understands Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
But if the person walks out, he says, "Okay, fine," and he leaves on May 15th, let's say, or no, it's Adar 15th. He just says, "I'm walking out the door." Does he have to pay for the full month?
No, he doesn't have to pay for anything. He doesn't have to pay. He doesn't have to pay for the half that he lived through because he already lived through it, and he can walk out in the middle because he's allowed to leave at the end of every month. So at least I would expect that he would be able to walk out at that point. I'm not 100% sure on that, but the bottom line is that it certainly seems like he can walk out at that point. Okay, so we now have this question. Now we have a different question, right? So we began by saying that we had the statement of Shmuel, and we were unsure whether Shmuel agrees with Ben Nanas or disagrees with Ben Nanas. First, we thought that he agreed with Ben Nanas because both he and Rav say that if I say I'm selling you a core for 30, and then I add a saw for sella, that every saw costs a sella, then we follow the last language, and as I pour each saw, you acquire it. But now we also have this statement that makes clear that Shmuel disagrees with Ben Nanas. So why is it in the saw for sella situation that he's focused on the last language? So really, they don't think about it. V'hasam taimamai, and what's the reason in the case of the when they come that they divide things in the middle of the month? Mishum de toughest. It's because each one has hold of the half of the month, meaning the landlord still owns effectively the half of the month that hasn't been rented yet, and the tenant already owns the half of the month that's already passed. But hachinami hatafis, and so too when it comes to, and so now we can explain and understand that when he says a core for 30 slime, a saw for a sella, that the situation is because the buyer is holding each saw, that's why each saw is considered bought. It's not because of Ben Nanas' view. So as a result, this leads to a very important conclusion, where when it comes to Rav, the reason that Kor Bishloshim Saw Bisela, we follow a Saw Bisela, is because the Saw Bisela was said last. And so as a result, we're just going to follow, like Ben Nanas, whatever was said last. But according to Shmuel, it's not about it being said last. It's about there being two separate statements, and we're going to view things in the way that's the most advantageous for the buyer. And so the most, that is, we're going to view things as based on who's holding the item. And so as a result, whoever's holding the item has the upper hand. And so as a result, it doesn't make a difference if we were to say a saw for a sella and then a core for shloshim sella, slime, well, then it wouldn't make a difference. And Shmuel would also say in that situation that the buyer gets whatever he's already been given. Because again, he's not focused on Ben Nanas' view of following the second declaration, but rather he's focused on who's holding the item. And whoever's considered to be holding the item, that's the person who's going to win.
So it would not matter what the order was if once the produce is transferred, that buyer now holds it. Whether the person, the mocher made the one statement first or another statement first.
That's exactly correct. Exactly correct. According to Ben Nanas. Now we're going to have
according to Shmuel.
What?
According to Shmuel.
Yes, I apologize. Did I say Ben Nanas? I meant according to Shmuel. Yes, according to Shmuel. Thank you. So now we're going to have, so the important thing is that on some level, we've given an understanding of okay, never mind. All right, so let's take a look at a third case. So we've looked at 3 different cases. Case number 1 was our Mishnah, where I say I'm selling you measured, and then I say I'm selling you more or less.
Right.
So the second case is I say that I'm well, actually, I guess we've looked at 3 cases. One, the case number 2 is I tell you I'm renting you the bathhouse 12 for a year or 1 per month. And then the question is what about the extra month? And then the third situation is I'm selling you 30 saw for 30 slaim, and then I say 1 saw per sella. So now and again, we've now given that we've dealt with that situation as well. Now we deal with a fourth situation, essentially, where there's no question that there's seems to be an inconsistency between the 2 statements, because again, we've now come up with effectively explanations for how each of those first 3 statements could be understood to sort of incorporate both halves, right? In our Mishnah, it could be that the idea is that I'm trying to say to Stan, I want to win whether I sold you a little extra or I sold you too little. That if I sold you a little extra, I want to get paid for it. If I sold you too little, I want it. I still want you to pay the full amount. And then
whose opinion is that? That's Shmuel, right?
Yes, that was Shmuel's opinion. Correct.
That's what the Rashbam mentioned.
Correct.
It would
exactly.
seem that it would seem that
this we never did Rabbeinu Gershom. I apologize.
I know, but that would seem that this opinion is a variation of selling the ba'ayin ra'ah, that the mocher is really the one benefiting, right? Doesn't that sound a little bit like ayin ra'ah?
Yes, it does sound a little bit like ayin ra'ah, 100%. Now, I will note that so Rabbeinu Gershom's just interpretation is when he says that the lashon katzar halach akar pachas shebeloshonos, that you go after the lesser of the 2 languages. What it means is, if we take a look in the Rabbeinu Gershom is in the left-hand column of the on the left edge of the page, and it's near the bottom of the narrow lines. It's about 12 lines up in the narrow lines. It says achar pachas shebeloshonos, achar lashon shehu katzar, after the language which is shorter. Bein de amarle mi de bechevel hein cheser hein yeser, whether I said measured or less or more. Bein de amarle hein cheser hein yeser mi de bechevel, or if I say whether less or more or measured. Lo bitel hai mikame. We're not going to nullify whichever comes first. Hai, mikame hai, whichever comes before the other. Rather, v'azlinan basar mida bechevel, we will always follow the measured amount. Dahainu pachas shebeloshonos, because that has the fewest words. The lashon katzarhu, because that is the fewest words. So that's a different way of understanding the Gemara. Obviously, you have to go through the Gemara and figure out how to interpret that. But in any event, that's just wanted to make sure to catch you up on that piece. So again, so now we have a fourth category as we pick up.
Basically, you don't even need this whole discussion in the Gemara, according to Rabbeinu Gershom, but you always follow the chevel.
Correct. Well, absolutely. That's exactly right. So you do need the discussion, because the question is, how do we understand, right? Well, again, for him, he would say, well, wait a second. The question about 30 for a kor bishloshim sa besela ani mocher lach, right? So the question is those are pretty much similar language, but Sa Bisela is a little shorter than Kor Bishloshim. So does that mean that we always follow Sa Bisela? So that might be how he understands it. So we're always following the shorter language. And that's the question is it looks like we're following the later language, but no, he's understanding it that we're always following it the shorter language. But okay. So but all right, so now Amar Rav Huna, Amar Be Rav. So they said in the Academy of Rav, Istara Me'amai, that if I were to tell you in Istara, which is worth 96 prutot, and then I say 100 ma'os, which is referred to as a 100 prutos, and so the question is, what's the amount? So, which do we follow? So the answer is me'amai. We follow 100. So again, we're now first words on the fourth line on Kuf Hey Amud Bet. And if I were to do me'amai istara, if I were to say 100 mos and an istara, well then istara. Then the buyer only needs to pay an istara. So this is clear that the Bei Rav is saying that you follow benanis. So my Kamash Milan, what is he teaching us? What is Rav Huna teaching us that this was taught in the Academy of Rav? Of course, Rav follows benanis. So as a result, of course, you would follow the last language. So ha-amra Rav chadazimna. Rav already told us this. The Amar Rav, ihabi hasam, haba yehivna kula lamaskir. Because Rav says that he would have given the entire month's rent to the landlord. Why? Because the landlord's last statement was 1 gold piece, 1 gold dinar per month. And that last statement should have been followed. So we see from Rav that he follows benanis. So skipping the parentheses. So Mao de Tema. So 1 second. So actually we do need Rav to tell us this, because what might I have thought? Parushe Kap Mefarish, that when Rav was dealing with the rental of the bathhouse, you might have said that the reason that he allows the landlord to get the whole amount is he was just explaining that basically after saying the price was 12 dinars for the year, he realized that 1 second, maybe there's going to be a leap year. And so that's why he added the phrase of a dinar per month. So meaning that he's really trying to say it's a dinar, it's 12 dinars for the whole year if there's no extra months. But if there's an extra month, I want a dinar per month. So Kamash Milan, and therefore maybe only in that case he would follow the last language. But in this case, he would have to either say that we split it or some other method of making the determination. And in the end, we say that we follow the last language. And so as a result, even when you say 96 and then 100, it means that you follow the entire amount. Okay, so let's do the last Rashbam on the page. And with that, we will conclude for the day. So Kamash Milan, Rav de Benanis Virole. So this is teaching us that actually Rav agrees with Benanis. V'hach de istara mea mai libisof itmar came second. V'hach de istara mea mai libisof itmar kain nira ba'enai. That in fact, if you have the istara and then Maimai, you follow the latter one. That's what it seems in my opinion. Bava Metzia, Parakashoel, Hachi Garcin Mao de Tema, what might I have thought? Perusha Kamafarish. I might have thought that he was trying to explain Kamash Milan. Velo Garcin and Ime Hasam Hava Amin and Perusha Kamafarish. De Baha de Istra Meamai, Perusha Kamafarish, Lake Lamemar. You can't say that the language of explanation somehow applies to the 96 and 100, because the 96 and 100 are clearly conflicting. Devada Istra havi pachas me'amai, because an Istra is certainly less than 100 prutos. Udami mamish lemasnisin dehain cheser hein yeser mida b'chevel. And so it's completely comparable to when one says a little bit more or a little bit less. So then the Rashbam offers another interpretation that he doesn't like, but let's go down to the bottom line, to the third line from the bottom, about 3, 6, 7 words into the line. V'hashta, desfirule l'rav, tafos lashon achron bi'inan. I'm sorry, the tafos lashon achron. And now that we say that Rab says that we follow the last language, Be'inan leperushe had de Rav Shmuel de Amri Tarvayu Kor b'shloshim sa b'sela rishon kana lerav that now we can understand that when Rav and Shmuel both agreed that if I were to say that I'm selling you a core for 30 and I'm selling you a saw for at each sela, that we say that each saw is acquired as it is poured. L'Rav time mishum de tafas lashon achron. According to Rav, it's because we follow the latter language of sa b'sela. V'ipich mepach and if we were to switch the order, we would switch the conclusion. Lomar sa b'sela kor b'shloshim lo kana ad sheyimshok sa achrona. If you were to have reversed it and said saw b'sela and then kor b'shloshim, then according to Rav, you would not acquire the whole amount until you poured the last saw. Shmuel, but according to Shmuel de Masafkale, the ukimna l'didei mishum demai de tafis. But according to Shmuel, who says that we go based on what you're holding, so then bitarvayu amrinan rishon kana. Then it doesn't make a difference which the order is. You're going to follow the whoever's holding it and whoever's poured, however much has been poured, when both statements have been made, we're going to follow that amount. And so we'll pick up again with another Mishnah, God willing, at the top.
What's the last? Tell me again. When it's Shmuel, they made the toughest, but then okay, I understand that it's whatever he grabbed, but he says, "But I'm reading Rishon kana."
Yes, in both cases, whether you ordered kor b'shloshim or saw b'sela, whichever you said first and whichever you said last, we're going to say rishon kana, meaning that each saw is acquired by the buyer as it is poured. Doesn't make a difference which the order is of the statement of the seller.
Oh, okay, all right.
That's what he means. Right? Okay. Rishon kana means that each saw is acquired as it is poured.
Okay.
All right. Have a fabulous day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.